The rope creaked under the weight of the girl, her legs kicking against the unforgiving swing of the gallows. Every eye in the dusty town square was fixed on her, breaths caught, prayers whispered silently. The wind carried the scent of smoke and sun-baked earth, mingling with the bitter tang of fear. She was fast, clever, but even that could not save her from the lawless justice of a town that had forgotten mercy. The rope dug into her wrists, the noose tightening, and then a shadow fell over the platform. He moved like a storm across the wooden boards, boots pounding, eyes sharp and unyielding. Chief Apache did not hesitate. The crowd gasped as he leapt forward, strong hands gripping the rope, yanking her back from the edge of death. The swing of the noose jerked violently, and a collective murmur ran through the townsfolk. He held her tight, one arm under her legs, the other gripping her waist like he would never let go. "I pulled you out of hanging," he said, voice low and steady, carrying a weight that left no room for argument. "Now you are mine." His eyes burned with a quiet fire, a claim that was more than words. There was no softness, no room for negotiation. The girl, the runner bride they called her, struggled at first, flailing against the grip of a man who seemed carved from the land itself. Her chest heaved, but there was no fight strong enough to match his determination. The townspeople froze. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Men who prided themselves on courage stepped back. The gallows, meant to display justice, now seemed powerless against the will of a single man who moved with the certainty of nature itself. His cloak whipped against the wind as he carried her away from the platform, away from the gallows and the jeering crowd. Dust rose like a curtain behind them, marking the boundary between her past life and the uncertain road ahead. She looked up at him, eyes wide, fear mingled with disbelief. Her heart raced not just from the near death she had escaped, but from the force that had taken her from it. There was something in his presence that was both dangerous and unrelenting, something that promised both protection and possession. She tried to speak, but the words faltered, swallowed by the dry air of the desert and the intensity of his gaze. They did not run far before the sounds of the town faded behind them. The plain stretched out in every direction, a sea of gold under the dying sun. The wind carried whispers of freedom, of places where law and order had no claim and only survival mattered. He set her down gently, yet his hands lingered, firm, unyielding, as if anchoring her to him. The quiet was sudden, almost unnatural, after the roar of the crowd. Silence held them both, a fragile truce with the world. "You are mine," he repeated, and this time there was no mistaking the meaning. The words were not a threat, not exactly. They were a warning, a statement of truth, as undeniable as the sun setting over the horizon. She realized then that escaping death had not given her freedom. It had bound her to another kind of fate, one that would shape every step she took from this moment onward. The girl, skilled at running, skilled at surviving, felt the weight of that truth. Her past life, the days of running, of hiding, of dodging the law, was gone. Whatever choice she had once thought she owned had vanished with the swing of the rope and the iron grip of a man who did not bend. His name carried weight in the land, whispered in the winds, spoken with respect and fear. Chief Apache. A man who lived by his own rules, whose hand brought death and salvation in equal measure. She looked at him again. The fire in his eyes was not anger, not malice, but a fierce kind of certainty. He did not seek to charm her, nor to lull her into comfort. He only claimed what he had decided was his. And in that claim was a promise of both protection and peril. She had seen enough of the world to know that promises like that were not to be taken lightly. The first night under the open sky came with its own dangers. The desert was no gentle cradle. Coyotes howled at the edges of distant hills, and the wind carried the scent of predators unknown. He built a fire, placing her on the other side, his silhouette framed by flames that danced like living things. She watched him, wary, measuring, trying to understand this man who had plucked her from death as easily as one might pluck a stone from the riverbed. "Do not speak unless spoken to," he said. His words were simple, but they carried authority like a hammer strikes an anvil. "Trust is earned, and life is too short for foolishness," she nodded, though she knew her compliance was only a temporary shield. She could not let him see the depth of her fear, not until she understood what she had stepped into. The fire crackled between them, the night stretching into a tapestry of shadows and sound. Stars glittered coldly above, indifferent to the struggles below. She had no name for the feeling twisting in her chest. Was it fear? Awe? The strange pull of a destiny that had been waiting, unseen until now? She did not know. But she knew that from this night forward, nothing would be as it had been. Morning brought the scent of sage and dust, of life moving on in a land that ignored human concerns. They moved quickly, silently, Chief Apache leading her along paths known only to him. He spoke little, his communication a series of commands and signals, a language born of survival and instinct. She followed, learning, adapting, aware that every step, every hesitation, could mean the difference between safety and the swift judgment of the desert. Days passed, yet the shadow of the gallows never left her. Memories of the crowd, of the rope, of the taste of fear lingered. Chief Apache's presence was a constant anchor, grounding her in a reality she could neither control nor escape. And though she ran no more, the need for survival burned just as fiercely inside her. It was a new kind of running, now a running not from the law, but from the unknown, from the threats that lurked in every canyon, behind every rock, and sometimes, she feared, even in the heart of the man who saved her. He noticed her glances, her caution. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips. "Survival does not make you free," he said once, voice calm, measured. "Freedom is earned." "And sometimes it is taken," she did not answer. Words were unnecessary. The truth in his eyes, the certainty of his steps was enough. Their journey carried them across rivers that cut through red rock canyons, past mesas that towered like ancient sentinels. Each day brought new challenges, wild animals, bandits, and the ever-present threat of desert heat that could crush even the strongest. And all the while, Chief Apache was there, a constant force, a reminder that her life was no longer entirely her own. The runner bride began to understand the rhythm of this world, the delicate balance of trust, danger, and unspoken power. Her mind, once sharp with the need to flee, now learned the weight of following, of surviving under the shadow of a man who could kill with a glance or save with a hand. She learned the rules quickly. The desert did not forgive, and neither did he. On the fifth night, they camped near a canyon rim, the land stretching endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. Silence fell heavier than the desert heat of the day. She dared a glance at him and caught the firelight in his eyes, a glimmer that made her stomach tighten. There was something waiting, something she could not name, that made her pulse quicken. And she knew, even without words, that the next step would test her in ways the gallows never had. A sound in the distance broke the quiet, sharp and urgent. Chief Apache stiffened, instincts honed by years of survival snapping into place. "Stay," he ordered, low and unwavering. Her heart hammered, mind racing, as shadows shifted along the canyon walls. Something was coming. Something that would challenge both their survival and the fragile bond that had begun to form. She crouched behind a boulder, tense, eyes wide, senses straining. The wind carried whispers she could not understand, the desert holding its secrets close. Chief Apache moved silently, a shadow among shadows, ready for whatever threat approached. She felt the weight of his presence, the certainty that he would face whatever came with strength and strategy. And yet, fear clawed at her. This was only the beginning, she realized. Only the first test of a journey that would not forgive weakness. Her breath caught as the darkness at the canyon's edge seemed to pulse with motion. She knew then that the choice between life and death was never hers alone. The rope, the gallows, the saving hand, all had led her to this moment. Chief Apache's grip on her fate was absolute, and as she watched him, prepared and unflinching, she could not deny the strange thread of trust weaving through her fear. The shadows moved closer. Something unseen, yet unmistakably alive, drew near. She pressed herself against the rock, heart pounding. Chief Apache's eyes met hers briefly, a silent warning and a promise all in one. The night held its breath. The desert waited. And somewhere in the darkness, the next chapter of their lives was ready to unfold, uncertain, dangerous, and unavoidable. She realized then that she had been pulled from the rope, from death itself, only to step into a life that demanded more than courage. It demanded surrender, adaptation, and a kind of bravery that went beyond fear. And as the first movement of the approaching threat became clear, she knew her story was only beginning, and the desert held no mercy for the unprepared. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of hooves or perhaps something darker. Chief Apache's hand brushed her shoulder, a grounding touch that spoke more than words ever could. "Hold fast," he said, voice low but firm. "Everything from here on will test you. But remember this, you are mine, and I will not let go." She nodded, though inside a storm raged. The rope, the gallows, the desperate fight for life, it was all behind her now. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the strange tether of a bond she had not asked for but could not escape. The desert night swallowed the canyon whole, and in its depths, the first stirrings of a challenge that would define them both began to take shape. And so, beneath the cold glare of stars and the silent watch of the desert, the runner bride and Chief Apache waited, caught between what had been and what was to come, each heartbeat a drum signaling the dawn of trials that neither had yet imagined. The rope had saved her, but the desert would test her, and Chief Apache's claim would demand everything she had to give. The night held its secrets close, and in that darkness, their story was only beginning, ready to spill across the land in ways neither could yet see. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert, pale and hesitant, brushing the tips of the mesas with a gold that could not hide the harshness of the land. The runner bride remained crouched behind the rock, muscles tense, eyes tracking every movement along the canyon floor. Chief Apache was still silent, watching, listening, every sense alert. She could feel the weight of his presence like a shield pressed against her back, steady and unyielding. The desert had its own rhythm, and he was attuned to it in ways she could not yet understand. She tried to remember who she had been before that rope swung above her neck, before the crowd had jeered and spat. But the memories felt distant, like fragments of a story that belonged to someone else. The town, the gallows, the faces, it was all behind her, yet the fear lingered, a shadow she could not shake. Chief Apache had taken her life in his hands, and in doing so, he had claimed more than her body or her safety. He had claimed her trust, whether she wanted to give it or not. The desert stretched endlessly, an expanse of sand and rock that offered no comfort. But within its harshness lay survival, and within survival lay the rules of the man beside her. He was a mystery, a force she could neither challenge nor fully understand. His past was written in the scars that traced his hands, in the lines etched across his face, in the way his eyes seemed to measure the land and its threats with instinctive precision. There was a story there, one she wanted to know but feared to ask. He moved first, silent and deliberate, descending into the canyon with a knowledge of the terrain that made her feel small and unsteady. She followed, careful not to stumble, careful not to reveal the tremor in her hands. The wind carried scents she could not namesage, dust, the faint copper tang of blood from some distant kill. She realized then that every step she took was a lesson, a measure of endurance that would define her in ways the gallows never had. "Do you know why I saved you?" Chief Apache asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence, low and even. She shook her head, unsure how to answer. His eyes did not leave the horizon, yet they seemed to see more than the land, as though reading the currents of the air itself. Because death is cheap and life is not. And because some debts are meant to be collected face to face, he said, and she shivered, unsure whether he spoke of the rope, the town, or something far older than either. They came to a narrow pass where the rocks leaned together like guardians of some hidden path. Chief Apache stopped, crouched, listening to the wind as it shifted through the stones. He beckoned her closer, motioning for silence. Her heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from anticipation, a creeping awareness that every moment out here carried weight. There was danger in the wind, in the shadows, and she knew instinctively that this was a place that had seen more than it ever told. "You must learn," he said, his tone shifting, almost tender, "to read the land like it speaks to you. Every movement, every sound tells a story. Ignore it, and the desert will not forgive." She nodded, though she did not fully understand. His presence was both teacher and enforcer, a paradox she could not unravel yet felt compelled to obey. She had heard whispers of men like him in towns and settlements, tales of warriors who lived on the edge of law, who survived where others perished. But those stories were distant echoes compared to the man beside her. Chief Apache was not a legend. He was reality, and his reality was now hers. She realized with a strange mix of fear and fascination that she had stepped into a world that demanded more than courage. It demanded understanding, patience, and the willingness to follow a man who carried his own code of life and death. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the air grew cooler, carrying a hint of water from some hidden spring or creek. The runner bride caught her breath, marveling at the sudden change. Here, in this isolated place, the world felt different, removed from towns, gallows, and judgment. Yet even in this solitude, she sensed the undercurrent of threat. The desert had its own rules, and Chief Apache had not shown her all of them. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. He did not answer immediately, only observed her with eyes that seemed to pierce through her thoughts. "Because you run," he said at last, "and running tells me more about a person than standing ever could. But running alone is not enough. You must face what follows." His words hung heavy between them, a promise and a warning. The girl thought about the rope, the swing, the faces frozen in shock. She thought about the sudden strength that had lifted her from the brink of death. Chief Apache had acted with purpose, yet his motives remained hidden, shrouded in a layer of authority she could not yet penetrate. Every step with him revealed more about the land, about survival, and about the kind of man who had saved her. She realized that understanding him was as vital as understanding the desert itself. Hours passed as they navigated the canyon, each bend revealing new threats, narrow ledges that could crumble, hidden crevices that could swallow a foot, and the ever-present risk of animals that hunted silently, unseen until too late. Chief Apache moved with certainty, his steps deliberate and confident. She followed, learning, adjusting, realizing that obedience was not submission but strategy. To survive beside him, she had to anticipate his needs, his movements, his thoughts. They camped again as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and amber. He made no fire this time, only a circle of stones to mark their place. The desert held its breath around them, indifferent yet alive with potential danger. She sat, knees drawn up, watching him. He was repairing a small knife, hands precise, movements efficient. The simplicity of the act was deceptive. Every cut, every scrape carried purpose. "You are stronger than you know," he said without looking up, "but strength alone is not enough. Wisdom and timing matter more than muscles or speed." She studied him, realizing that his survival had not come from force alone. Every scar, every quiet decision, every calculated risk had shaped him into someone both feared and respected. And she understood that her own survival depended on absorbing that knowledge, piece by piece. Night fell fully, and the stars appeared, bright and cold. The desert around them was quiet now, the threats hidden but not gone. She lay on the ground, muscles aching, mind alert. Sleep was distant, and the events of the gallows lingered like shadows across her thoughts. Chief Apache sat nearby, silent, eyes scanning the horizon. She understood instinctively that his vigilance was constant, a wall against dangers she could not yet see. "Tomorrow we move again," he said finally, voice low. "The land is not forgiving, and neither are those who track it." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Each day with him revealed more than the day before, more about the desert, about survival, about the unspoken rules that governed the life of a man who had taken her from the gallows. She thought about the rope, about the crowd, about the moment when death had hung so close. That memory now seemed distant, yet it lingered, shaping her choices, sharpening her instincts. She realized that this man, this Chief Apache, was both her salvation and the test she had not known she needed. The road ahead would not be easy, and she knew that every step carried consequences that could change her life forever. The night stretched on, and with it came the faint sounds of the desert rustling leaves, distant calls, the soft whisper of wind. Chief Apache's presence was a constant reassurance and a reminder of the power that had claimed her. She could not yet name the bond that tied them, nor the dangers that lay ahead. But she knew one thing clearly: the rope had saved her from death, but the desert, and the man who walked it, would test every part of her being. A sudden movement at the edge of the canyon caught her eye, and she froze, pulse quickening. Chief Apache tensed beside her, hands ready, eyes sharp. The shadows shifted, and she caught a glimpse of shapes moving with purpose. Something was approaching, and it was not the wind or the animals. Her body tightened, muscles coiled with anticipation. The desert had many secrets, and she feared she was about to learn one she might not escape. Chief Apache's hand brushed hers, a grounding touch, a reminder that she was not alone. "Hold fast," he said, voice low but firm. "Trust what you see, but also trust me." "We will face this together," she nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The night was alive with danger, and the first test of her new life was at hand. The rope had been the beginning. This was only the next step. The canyon darkened further, and the shapes moved closer. She could see now the glint of metal, the low forms of riders perhaps, or animals trained to track. Her heart hammered, mind racing. Chief Apache crouched beside her, eyes scanning, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to act. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that she had been pulled from the gallows not to find freedom, but to face something far greater, a trial of survival, trust, and the strange, unspoken bond with the man who had saved her. The night held its breath. The desert waited. And in the shadows of the canyon, the first stirrings of a challenge that would test both body and spirit began to take shape. She pressed herself against the stone, aware that every heartbeat counted, every movement mattered, and that the rope above the town square was a distant memory compared to the trials ahead. Chief Apache's hand on her shoulder was the only certainty she had. The wind shifted again, carrying whispers she could not yet understand. She leaned closer to him, trusting him instinctively, even as her pulse raced. The desert would not forgive weakness. The unknown shapes at the canyon edge would not hesitate. And she, the runner bride, had been pulled from one death only to step into another. A world of danger, survival, and a claim she could not escape. The night stretched, silent but charged, waiting for the first move. Chief Apache's eyes met hers briefly, a warning and a promise. The desert around them held secrets, threats, and untold stories. She had been saved from hanging, yes, but the desert had not yet decided what it would do with her. And she knew with a shiver that the real test had only just begun, waiting beyond the shadows, beyond the canyon walls, and in the hand of the man who had made her his own. The canyon held its breath as the shapes drew nearer, shadows stretching unnaturally across the rock faces. Chief Apache crouched low, his hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder, a silent anchor against the tremor of fear that threatened to shake her resolve. She had never seen the desert move like this before. It was alive with possibility, danger, and the quiet patience of predators waiting for the wrong move. The shapes became clearer riders, mounted on horses as dark and lean as the canyon itself. Their faces were hidden under wide-brimmed hats, eyes shaded but alert. Dust rose around their hooves in lazy clouds, giving them the illusion of ghostly figures drifting across the earth. The runner bride pressed herself closer to the stone, heart hammering, feeling the heat of his presence beside her. Chief Apache's fingers brushed hers, not as comfort, but as a silent command to hold fast, to trust instinct and training over panic. "They are scouts," he said quietly, voice barely above the whisper of wind. "They are testing us. They do not yet know we are here." His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the terrain for traps, for vantage points, for weaknesses. "The land speaks if you listen. Watch the shadows. Watch the wind. And remember, running is not always the answer." The girl tried to follow his gaze, trying to read the subtle cues he gave, how the dust moved differently where horses had not yet pressed, how the wind shifted around their bodies, how the small rocks scattered beneath the hooves betrayed weight and speed. Each detail was a thread in a web of survival she had never known existed. Her mind raced to match his, and though she stumbled in her understanding, the effort itself was a measure of her determination to survive. From another ridge, the sound of hooves multiplied. They were closing in, forming a pattern, splitting into two groups. Chief Apache's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder, a motion that spoke volumes without a word. "They are trying to flank us," he said. "If they get between the canyon walls and the mesa, they will control the pass. We cannot allow that." The urgency in his voice was matched by the calm of his movements, a paradox she still could not reconcile. The canyon walls offered some cover, but it was deceptive. Rocks could crumble and shadows could betray. He led her along a narrow path that hugged the cliffside, each step calculated, deliberate. Every footfall was measured against the sounds below, the dust, the horses, the voices that carried the authority of lawless men unafraid to claim what was not theirs. She learned quickly that survival was not about speed alone, it was about timing, perception, and a willingness to follow a hand stronger and wiser than her own. She had noticed small details before, seemingly minor but revealing. The way he kept his knife sheathed yet ready, the way his eyes never left the terrain even when speaking, the faint scar along his jawline that seemed to mark him as someone who had walked through fire and returned unbroken. These fragments of his story hinted at a life lived on the edge, full of trials that had shaped him into a force of nature. And she knew, though she could not yet name it, that his past and his present were inextricably linked to the dangers that pressed around them now. The riders below slowed, as though sensing the presence of someone they could not yet see. Chief Apache signaled for her to stay low, pressing her body against the rock. She felt the tension ripple through him, a controlled awareness that seemed to ripple outward like an invisible shield. She realized that this was a dance he had performed countless times, an instinct honed by years of navigating danger, reading the land, reading men, reading fear. And she was learning, step by step, to move with him, to understand the rhythm of survival. One rider broke from the group, moving toward the canyon wall with a deliberate caution that spoke of reconnaissance. Chief Apache's eyes narrowed. He is testing the waters. Watch how he moves. There is arrogance in his caution. He believes himself untouchable. The girl studied the figure, noticing the small hand gestures, the way the reins were held loosely but controlled, the tilt of the head as if listening for something imperceptible. Every motion was a story of experience, of confidence, of hidden intent. Suddenly, the rider made a sharp turn, signaling the others. Chief Apache's gaze sharpened, and he whispered, "They know more than they should." Something has changed. She felt a cold prickle of fear. The desert was no longer only a landscape of survival. It had become a stage for a battle she did not yet understand. He glanced at her, eyes intense. "Stay ready. They will test us first, but they will not wait long for the challenge to come." Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant calls of the riders and the whisper of the wind through the canyon. The girl began to understand the subtleties of the land, the way the rocks could provide cover, the importance of shadow, the necessity of patience. Chief Apache moved her through these lessons with a discipline that left no room for hesitation. She felt herself changing, senses sharpening, instincts aligning with the rhythm of the canyon. Survival was no longer abstract. It was tangible, immediate, and relentless. In a small hollow, he stopped to rest, using the rocks for support while keeping watch. He unpacked a few provisions: dried meat, water, and a small bundle of herbs. He offered her a portion, and she ate with gratitude, though the tension never left her muscles. "Food keeps the body alive," he said, "but alertness keeps the mind alive." "Remember both," she nodded, noting the subtle way he watched the canyon, how every motion of wind, dust, and shadow informed his understanding of the world. She tried to speak, to ask about his past, but hesitated. Chief Apache had not volunteered stories of his own history. There was a weight to the silence, a sense that his experiences were too heavy to lighten with words. And yet, the little she had observed, the scars, the ease of movement, the intensity of his gaze, told her more than any words could. She realized that understanding him fully would be a process, one she could only approach carefully, step by step, as she learned to trust both his actions and his judgments. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the shadows shifted once more. The riders were moving again, this time with purpose, spreading out across the canyon floor in patterns designed to flesh them out. Chief Apache's hand touched hers again, firm, steady, a silent command to stay close, to trust, to follow. "They are clever," he said, voice low. "But cleverness without patience is weakness. Watch, learn, and move when the moment is right." The girl's mind raced with possibilities. Why were these men after them? What had drawn them to the canyon, to this remote passage that seemed hidden to all but the most observant? Her thoughts flitted between the rope, the gallows, the fleeting safety of the desert, and the enigmatic force that was Chief Apache. Each thread pulled at her curiosity, weaving a complex tapestry of fear, fascination, and an understanding that survival would demand more than courage alone. Night fell again, deep and unyielding, swallowing the canyon in darkness. Chief Apache lit no fire, yet the girl felt neither cold nor completely unsafe. His presence was a barrier, a constant shield against whatever prowled in the unseen. The riders below had paused, waiting, testing, probing. She realized with a shiver that their tactics were not brute force alone. They sought to understand, to manipulate, to outwit. And Chief Apache, ever vigilant, was engaged in the same silent battle of perception and anticipation. The girl could see now how every small movement mattered. A fallen rock could betray position. A whisper could draw attention. The desert had rules that extended beyond hunger and thirst, rules that governed strategy, observation, and timing. She watched him, tried to learn, and felt herself growing stronger, not in muscle alone, but in the mind and instincts that survival demanded. Hours passed with a quiet tension, punctuated by the distant movement of the riders and the occasional whisper of wind against stone. Chief Apache remained alert, a sentinel who measured the risks, the possibilities, and the strategies that would define the night. He did not speak, but each glance, each shift of weight, communicated what she needed to know. Trust, she realized, was a weapon as sharp as any knife, and she would need it fully if she hoped to survive what was coming. The canyon stretched endlessly, and in its folds and shadows, threats moved unseen. The riders below were clever, but Chief Apache was patient, calculating, a force shaped by years of trials. The girl felt the bond of necessity tightening around them, a link forged in danger, in the shared understanding that survival demanded unity. She had been pulled from the rope, yes, but she understood now that her life had only truly begun when she stepped into this world, a world of danger, strategy, and the unyielding claim of a man who had saved her. The night pressed on, and with it came the first hints of action. Shapes moved closer, signals passed between riders, and the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Chief Apache's eyes met hers briefly, a silent warning, a promise of what was to come. The girl realized then that everything she had known about running, about fear, about survival, was being rewritten. And she understood with stark clarity that the rope, the gallows, and the town square were distant shadows compared to the trials that waited in the canyon ahead. The desert whispered secrets only he could hear, only he could interpret. And she, the runner bride, was learning to listen, to follow, and to trust a man whose presence was both protector and force of reckoning. The night was not yet over, and the challenge that awaited them was only beginning to take form. Every heartbeat carried the weight of survival. Every shadow hinted at danger, and every step forward was a test of courage, trust, and instinct. The riders had not yet made their move, but the tension was unbearable, stretching tight like a drawn bow. Chief Apache's hand brushed hers again, grounding her, preparing her, silently reminding her that she was not alone. And as the canyon seemed to tighten around them, filled with unseen threats, the girl understood that the rope had been only the beginning. What lay ahead would define her, test her, and perhaps change her in ways she could not yet imagine. The wind shifted again, carrying a distant sound, a low murmur that hinted at movement beyond their sight. Chief Apache's gaze followed it, sharp, precise, unflinching. "They will move soon," he said, voice low and steady. "And when they do, every choice, every instinct, every step will matter. Prepare yourself." The night held them in suspense, the canyon alive with anticipation. The desert was unforgiving, the riders cunning, and Chief Apache relentless. And the girl, pulled from death itself, now stood at the edge of a new trial, one that promised danger, strategy, and a test of trust unlike anything she had ever faced. The rope had saved her from one fate, but the desert, the canyon, and the man who had claimed her would test her in ways she could not yet see. The shadows moved closer, the wind whispered secrets, and the night waited for the first spark of conflict. Chief Apache's eyes never left the horizon, and she, the runner bride, understood that survival was no longer optional, it was a war, silent but deadly, that would demand everything from both of them. The night had stretched long, the canyon holding its secrets like a predator coiled in the shadows. The girl crouched behind the jagged rock, senses honed sharper than they had ever been before. Chief Apache moved beside her, a silent shadow, every muscle poised for the first sign of attack. The riders had circled below, patient, calculating, testing the canyon as if it were a living thing. Every sound, the rustle of loose gravel, the faint whisper of wind was amplified, every movement scrutinized. "They are closing in," he murmured, voice low but firm, barely audible over the sigh of the desert night. His eyes never left the shifting shadows below. The girl felt the pulse of his energy, a quiet tension that radiated outward, gripping her own nerves in a tight, controlled coil. She knew instinctively that any misstep now could be fatal. The canyon was alive with danger, and the first sparks of the coming storm were already in the air. The scouts had split again, moving in angles designed to flank them from multiple directions. Dust rose in subtle clouds around the edges, betraying their path. Chief Apache's hand brushed hers, a grounding motion, a reminder to focus, to trust, to move only when the moment demanded. Her fingers trembled slightly, the tension of the night pressing in from every side, but she held herself steady. He had pulled her from the rope, from death itself, and now he demanded the same level of courage in a living, breathing battlefield of their own making. "Watch the wind," he whispered, crouched low, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. "It carries more than dust. Listen, learn. The desert speaks." She strained to follow, catching the faintest shifts of air, the subtle movements of the horses, the slightest creak of the riders' saddles. Each sound painted a picture, a map of danger that stretched across the canyon floor. A sharp cry split the night, the echo bouncing off the canyon walls. Chief Apache stiffened instantly, muscles tensing like coiled wire. The girl pressed herself lower, heart hammering in her chest. The cry had come from the right flank, the most vulnerable path they had yet to traverse. He signaled with a subtle tilt of his head, a direction she understood without words. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat now carried the weight of survival. From the shadows the first rider emerged, moving cautiously, scanning the rocks as if expecting the desert itself to rise against him. Chief Apache's eyes narrowed. "The first move," he said, voice quiet but commanding. "They test for weakness. They will not wait long." His fingers tightened slightly on the girl's arm, an anchor against her rising panic. She felt the full weight of his presence, the certainty that he would not falter, that he would act when the time was right. The rider's horse snorted, tossing its head, and a small rock dislodged, clattering down the canyon floor. The sound echoed like thunder. Chief Apache's gaze snapped to the movement, calculating, measuring. He moved with fluid precision, a force of nature, positioning himself so that the shadows of the canyon gave them cover. The girl followed, mimicking his posture, mimicking his patience, learning the rhythm of the night and the land itself. A second rider appeared, signaling the others. The scouts were moving faster now, driven by impatience or perhaps confidence. Chief Apache whispered instructions, voice low, almost a part of the night itself. "They believe they have control. They do not. Wait for the moment they overreach." He glanced at her briefly, eyes locking in a moment that conveyed both warning and trust. She nodded, feeling the tension coil tighter in her chest. Every second brought them closer to the breaking point, closer to the clash that would determine survival. The canyon seemed to hold its breath as the riders advanced, dust curling around them like smoke from a distant fire. Chief Apache shifted, positioning her behind a jutting rock, one hand lightly resting on her shoulder. "Do not move until I say," he instructed. She obeyed, muscles trembling with anticipation, mind racing through possibilities. The desert had already tested them, teaching patience and perception, but this was the test that mattered most, the first move in a confrontation that could shape everything that followed. The lead scout's horse reared slightly, signaling hesitation. Chief Apache's eyes flicked to the movement, reading the doubt in the man's posture, the tension in his muscles. "They are uncertain," he murmured, clever but hesitant. "The moment is near." The girl felt a shiver of fear and exhilaration. The night had been long, filled with observation and restraint, but now the storm was ready to break. Suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed through the canyon, carried by the wind. The riders below reacted instantly, moving as one, a coordinated unit of speed and aggression. Chief Apache's stance hardened, and he drew his knife, its edge catching the faint light of the stars. He pressed close to her, guiding her to a position where she could see without being seen. "This is it," he said, "the first move. Remember everything you've learned." The girl's heart raced as the riders began to close in, their figures emerging from the shadows like ghosts of threat. The canyon floor was alive with movement, the dust swirling in response, masking intentions and footsteps. She watched Chief Apache, noting the precision of his posture, the economy of his movements, the way his eyes calculated the trajectory of every rider, every hoof, every subtle shift of the wind. A sudden shout rang out from below, and the riders scattered slightly, testing the canyon walls for weakness. Chief Apache's hand pressed lightly against hers, a signal, a warning. "Now," he whispered, voice taut with the anticipation of action. He moved with speed and precision, positioning himself to strike from the shadows, his knife catching light as it traced a lethal path. The girl's pulse surged as she understood, truly understood, the weight of his skill, the power of his presence. The lead rider surged forward, overconfident, underestimating the canyon, underestimating the man who had claimed the girl from the rope. Chief Apache's hand struck, precise and unyielding, forcing the rider back, twisting the horse's movement with calculated force. The desert responded, rocks shifting, dust erupting, creating chaos that masked every move. The girl's breath caught as she saw the rider stumble, regaining balance only because of the horse's agility, and she realized how close death always was in this land. Another scout tried to circle the ridge, attempting to flank them from above. Chief Apache's gaze followed, unblinking, and he moved with the precision of a predator. Every motion was deliberate, each step calculated to maximize leverage and control. He was not just fighting the riders. He was controlling the terrain, bending the canyon itself to his will. The girl mirrored his actions, crouched low, watching, learning, her instincts merging with his in a silent, unspoken rhythm. The tension stretched, thick and suffocating, as the riders regrouped, testing again for weaknesses. The desert echoed with the sound of hooves, the scrape of leather, the whisper of wind. Chief Apache's voice was low, guiding, reminding, shaping her understanding of movement and perception. "Do not act until you must," he said. "Patience now saves more than bravery ever could." She understood then the depth of the man beside her, the skill honed through years of survival and battle. His presence was a wall, a force of reckoning, a protector who demanded her focus, her discipline, and her trust. The rope, the gallows, and the town square had been only the beginning. Here, in the canyon, every lesson from the desert, every instinct, every learned moment of patience would be tested to the extreme. The lead scout paused again, scanning the terrain, and for a brief moment the canyon seemed still, holding its breath. Chief Apache's fingers brushed hers again, grounding her in the calm before the storm. "Soon," he whispered, eyes sharp, scanning the horizon. "Everything comes down to the first move. Watch, learn, survive." She felt the weight of the desert around them, the presence of the riders, and the unyielding force of the man beside her. The canyon seemed to contract, alive with anticipation, each shadow a potential threat, each sound a signal of danger. The night pressed in, the stars cold and distant, the wind carrying whispers of the coming clash. Then the first real movement came. A rider surged forward too fast, too eager, misjudging the terrain. Chief Apache's eyes flashed, and he acted with lethal precision, striking from the shadows, forcing the rider into a narrow path where the canyon itself became a weapon. Dust erupted, hooves skidded, and the girl felt the surge of adrenaline, the raw intensity of the first real battle in this unfolding conflict. The other riders reacted instantly, sensing the danger, and the canyon became a maze of chaos and controlled force. Chief Apache moved like a force of nature, every action calculated, every step measured. The girl mirrored him as best she could, crouched low, observing, learning, feeling the rhythm of survival coursing through her. Each passing moment was a test of instinct, courage, and trust. The night stretched, the tension mounting, every movement from the riders a threat, every glance from Chief Apache a lesson. The canyon held its breath, the desert alive with anticipation, and the girl understood fully that her life, her fate, and the bond she shared with the man beside her had reached the pinnacle of suspense. Every heartbeat counted. Every shadow could conceal danger. Every step was crucial. And as the first confrontation unfolded, with the canyon alive with dust, movement, and threat, the girl knew one truth above all. The rope had saved her life once, but survival in the desert, beside Chief Apache, demanded everything she had yet to give. The climax was near, the tension unbearable, the stakes higher than ever, and the night held its secrets close, waiting for the moment when all would be revealed. The canyon exploded into motion, dust and shadows twisting together as the riders surged forward, testing the limits of both terrain and patience. Chief Apache moved like a shadow of the land itself, every step precise, every movement measured. The girl stayed close, crouched low, heart hammering, instincts sharpened to the point where fear and awareness were indistinguishable. She had learned to read the desert as he did, to anticipate movement, to feel the pulse of danger beneath her feet. A rider lunged from the right flank, desperate to catch them off guard. Chief Apache intercepted, his body a barrier of force and strategy. He twisted the man's momentum, guiding him into a narrow crevice where the canyon walls did the rest. The girl watched, tense, as the rider struggled, the horse skidding on loose rock, and she understood fully the precision of his skill. This was not brute strength alone. This was experience, timing, and a mind sharpened by countless tests of survival. The remaining scouts hesitated, sensing the shift in control. Chief Apache pressed forward, knife flashing under the moonlight, moving like a predator with purpose. The girl mirrored his movements, every instinct tuned to his rhythm. She felt the adrenaline surge, a mix of fear and exhilaration, realizing that she had been transformed from a frightened runner into someone capable of reading and responding to danger with clarity. Every lesson he had imparted over the long hours of the desert now became a tool for survival. The riders regrouped, desperate, but their confidence had waned. The canyon, which had seemed their domain, had become an obstacle they could not dominate. Chief Apache used every natural advantage, forcing them into choke points, using rocks and shadows to his benefit. The girl moved beside him, crouched, alert, her eyes following each motion, learning the dance of strategy and survival. She was no longer merely saved, she was part of the force, part of the solution. The lead rider attempted a final charge, arrogance giving him the courage he lacked in tactics. Chief Apache met him head-on, moving with a fluidity that made every strike and parry feel inevitable. The clash echoed through the canyon, a battle of wills as much as of bodies. The girl stayed close, ready to intervene if needed, ready to act in the moments he had taught her to anticipate. Each movement was deliberate, each choice critical. The dust swirled, and the canyon seemed to pulse with the energy of the confrontation. Finally, the riders faltered, disorganized and exhausted from the precision and timing of their opponent. Chief Apache's eyes swept the canyon floor, ensuring every threat was neutralized or contained. The girl exhaled slowly, realizing for the first time that the danger had passed, the immediate threat subdued. The desert returned to its quiet hum, stars reflecting off the dust and stone like silent witnesses. The riders had tested them, and they had failed, not by lack of strength, but by underestimating skill, patience, and unity. Chief Apache turned to her, face illuminated by the moonlight, eyes intense yet softened by the release of tension. "You survived," he said quietly, voice steady but filled with a subtle pride. "Not just because of me, but because you learned to see what the desert tells you, to trust instincts, to act when necessary." The girl nodded, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration washing over her. She had faced death in the town, had faced threats in the canyon, and now felt the first real spark of confidence in her own strength. The canyon was silent, the echoes of the battle fading. Chief Apache guided her to a small ledge overlooking the pass below, where the first light of dawn began to stretch across the desert floor. The riders were gone, scattered and broken, their arrogance replaced by caution or retreat. The girl looked at the canyon, at the landscape that had tested them so harshly, and felt a deep respect for the land and the man who had taught her its language. "You see," he said, watching her closely, The rope saved you once, yes, but survival is not about luck alone. It is about understanding, observation, patience, and courage. Remember that. She nodded again, understanding now that the lessons had been more than physical. They had been a test of character, of resilience, of trust in someone stronger and wiser. She had been saved, yes, but she had also been forged, reshaped by the desert and the man who had claimed her from death. They moved along the canyon floor as dawn broke fully, light spilling over the ridges, illuminating the scars of the night. Chief Apache's movements were careful, deliberate, ensuring no threat lingered, no shadows hid a final danger. The girl walked beside him, lighter now, not because the threat was gone, but because she understood herself more clearly. The desert had demanded her focus, and she had answered. The rope had been the beginning. This survival, this skill, this newfound strength was the path forward. Hours later, they emerged from the canyon into an open plain. The land stretched wide and untamed, but it felt different now, less hostile, less mysterious. The girl felt the weight of tension lift slightly from her shoulders, replaced with awareness and confidence. She had survived, learned, and endured. The desert had tested her. Chief Apache had guided her, and she had grown stronger. Chief Apache finally paused, turning to her fully. "You have changed," he said, voice carrying the weight of truth and acknowledgement. "Not because I claimed you, but because you chose to learn, to endure, to trust. That is strength few possess." She met his gaze, feeling the connection that had grown between them, not a bond of fear, but of respect, understanding, and mutual reliance. She realized that her journey had begun long before the rope, long before the canyon, long before the night's confrontation. It had begun the moment she had been given a chance at life, and every step since had been part of shaping her into someone capable of facing danger, of reading the land, and of trusting a man who walked the desert like it was an extension of himself. The lessons had been harsh, the nights long, the threats real, but she had endured. Chief Apache scanned the horizon, then turned back to her with a faint smile. "The desert will always test those who walk it," he said. "But you have learned its language, and that makes you different. That makes you ready." The girl nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She was not only alive. She was prepared, resilient, and capable of shaping her own path forward. They walked together, leaving the canyon behind, the landscape gradually softening as morning light revealed distant hills and the promise of open land ahead. The girl felt a sense of freedom she had not known before, tempered by the knowledge that life was never without risk, but that preparation, courage, and trust could overcome even the harshest trials. Finally, they paused beside a small stream, water glinting in the early sun. Chief Apache knelt, cupping his hands to drink, and gestured for her to do the same. She knelt beside him, the cool water a reminder of life and renewal. The desert, once a place of danger and challenge, now seemed to offer a quiet blessing, a moment of calm after the storm. "You see," he said softly, "life is a series of challenges. Some we survive by chance, some we survive by strength. But the most important, the ones that matter most, we survive by learning, by trusting, and by choosing when to act." She looked at him, eyes reflecting both gratitude and understanding. She had learned these lessons, not from stories, not from distant observation, but from living them, from enduring, from trusting. The sun climbed higher, casting warmth over the land. Chief Apache finally released the tension that had held him so tightly all night, a rare relaxation in his posture. The girl felt it too, a lightness she had not known since the rope had threatened to end her life. The canyon, the riders, the threat, they were behind them now. What lay ahead was unknown, yes, but she faced it with confidence, skill, and a bond that had been forged in fire and shadow. As they walked side by side, she felt a sense of completion, not only of survival, but of transformation. The rope had pulled her from death, The canyon had tested her, and the desert had taught her to endure. Chief Apache had guided her, not as a captor, but as a teacher, a protector, a companion who had seen strength she had not yet recognized in herself. And as the first distant smoke of a settlement appeared on the horizon, she realized that life could continue, danger could persist, but she was ready. She was no longer merely a girl who had been saved from hanging. She was a runner, a survivor, a learner of the desert, and a companion to a man whose presence had reshaped her understanding of courage and trust. Chief Apache glanced at her, eyes softening, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The past is behind us," he said. "The future is ours to walk, and I have no doubt we will endure whatever comes next." "You have learned well," she returned the smile, understanding fully the weight and meaning of his words. The sun rose higher, the desert warming, the canyon fading behind them. Every step forward was a choice, a continuation, a promise of life lived fully and fiercely. The rope had once been her end. Now beside him, she felt it had been the first step toward a life of resilience, courage, and trust. The desert had tested them both, but in the end, they had endured. And in enduring, they had found not only survival, but a quiet victory, a sense of purpose, and a bond that would carry them into the days ahead. As they walked into the open plains, leaving danger behind and carrying lessons learned, the girl felt the final weight of the night lift. Chief Apache's presence beside her was no longer a force of intimidation, but of partnership, of shared strength, of respect earned through trial. The desert had been merciless, but it had also been a teacher, and they had emerged not only alive, but stronger, wiser, and prepared for whatever horizon awaited. The canyon was behind them, the night a memory, the rope a symbol of what had been overcome. The girl and Chief Apache walked side by side into the sunlit expanse, hearts steady, eyes sharp, ready for life beyond survival. And for the first time since the gallows, she felt a quiet certainty. She was truly free, truly alive, and truly capable of facing whatever came next together.